Hello friends, welcome to my YouTube channel English with Bhavani. Today we are going to deal a very interesting lesson from class 11 CBSE Mother's Day. It is written by J.B. Priestley. Dear students, this is a lesson which is based on the theme of the status of women. The main issue that the play raises is that the lady of the house, who is just like an actress, is never given her due respect, especially if she is a simple housewife. The family members take her for granted. She works like an unpaid servant. The major themes in the play focuses on the issues of family, of standing up for oneself, even if it means telling certain harsh truths, and also to understand that one should not allow even their own loved ones to do as they please. Now, let us talk about the setting of the play. The place is London suburban area and time may be between 1910 to 20 because women in England got right to vote in 1918. So, for as universal design of learning is considered, the play deals with Mrs. Pearson standing up for her rights to get the respect she deserved. Here it is a symbolic play that deals with female rights. We will talk about some important vocabulary. It is all written here and the link is given in the description box. So I am not going to just take the words in detail. You can just go through the PowerPoint presentation, but I will simply talk about the main issues. The main characters in the play. So the main character is Mrs. Pearson. She is a timid and confused lady. She is in her 40s. She is a devoted housewife, enjoys serving her husband and children. She is ignored and made to work throughout the day, in spite of their ill treatment, neglect and exploitation. She loves them all. In fact, for that she endures everything without any murmur or protest. We feel sympathize for her. We wish her to be a little bit more assertive. Second important character in the story in the play is Mrs. Fitzgerald. Experienced and smart, knows some esoteric magic that she had learned in the East, heavier, and has a strong and sinister personality. She is liberated, strong, dominating, and bold. She smokes and plays cards. Mrs. Fitzgerald has a deep voice. Her accent is Irish. She is firm, strong, result oriented, and she sets all the spoiled members of Mrs. Pearson's family right. Then we have Doris, daughter of Mrs. Pearson, pretty girl in her early 20s, a spoiled child. She makes her mother run after her all the time, gives order to her, as if Mrs. Pearson were the servant in the house. She asks her mother to iron her yellow silk. She expects tea to be served to her. She always thinks of her and her boyfriend, Charlie. Another important character is Cyril. He is the masculine counterpart of Doris, spoilt like his sister. He is in the habit of treating his mother very casually. He asks if tea is ready. When Mrs. Pearson says no, he angrily answers back, why not? Then he orders, did you put my things out? So he makes his mother run all the time doing one thing or the other. George Pearson, another important factor, husband of Mrs. Pearson, about 50, self-important, pompous, neglects his wife, club members backbites and make fun of him. So these are the five important characters in this play. Now, the style of the play is magic realism. Magic realism is a modern method used in fiction where magical elements are intermixed with the realistic description of everyday affair in such a way that the magical elements are taken as realistic description which help in emphasizing some basic aspect where the writer wants to give focus. In this play, Mrs. Fitzgerald changes her body swapping with Mrs. Pearson, something which is impossible in real life. However, the reader does not object to this fantastic aspect in the plot line because this element has been used in such a way in the plot line that the reader overlooks the impossibility as his real focus is the real issues of the play which is highlighted by the dramatist. The style is also comical satire. Mother's Day is a comical satire. The story is a simple one, yet it strongly condemns the position of women in society. Our mothers and wives work hard daily, turning our houses into homes. They receive no wages and have no weekends off and work all day long, around the clock. Little do we realize the hard work they put in to make it all perfect. We take them for granted and never appreciate them or stop by to drop a word of thanks. The story very clearly states that our mothers and wives have equal right to relax, enjoy their lives, and deserve acknowledgement and appreciation. They sacrifice their whole lives building ours. Husbands stay busy at work, and kids are occupied in their own lives. Amidst all this, women lose their self trying to contain our world. Now let us talk about the overview of the play. Mother's Day is a satire on British families where mothers are taken for granted and not treated with respect the way they should be. The play opens with Mrs. Pearson talking to her neighbor, a fortune teller. She tells Mrs. Pearson that her predictions indicate that it is in her hands whether she wishes to improve her fortune or ruin it. She tells Mrs. Pearson to set her foot down and assert herself as the mistress of the house. Mrs. Pearson timidly tries to defend her family but is virtually compelled by Mrs. Fitzgerald into taking things in her hand to bring about the change. She insists that Mrs. Pearson's family members be taught a lesson and she will help her to do it. With the aid of magical spells, they swap their personalities. Mrs. Fitzgerald, as the new Mrs. Pearson, sits smoking and drinking, while Mrs. Pearson, as the new Mrs. Fitzgerald, leaves. Mrs. Pearson's spoiled daughter is the first to return home to the new mother and is shocked to see her mother smoking. Soon her brother Cyril and her father come in and are equally taken aback by the transformation in the mild-natured Mrs. Pearson. Mrs. Pearson refuses to do their biddings as she had done for years. Instead, she openly smokes and drinks, which leaves her family bewildered and dumbfounded. Mrs. Fitzgerald returns to the scene, asks Mrs. Pearson how things are progressing. The latter insists that she can't trouble her family and should stop the entire charade. What follows is an interesting turn of events, and the play concludes on a satisfying note with Mrs. Pearson regaining her dignity. There are certain quotable quotes in the play which I have mentioned here, and one can find the explanation in the description link. Husbands, sons, daughters should be taking notice of wives and mothers and not giving them orders and treating them like dirt. This is the quotation of Mrs. Fitzgerald. It indicates that the family must treat wives and mothers with full respect and be after them instead of throwing orders. Another one is from Doris, and that is what made me cry. It wasn't what she said, but the way she said it. It indicates that she tells Cyril that it's not her words that hurt her, but the look in her eyes that made her cry. So similarly, there are some other quotations. This is the way a lesson should be developed. The quotable quote should be picked up from the lessons, and because there are certain questions on interpretation of these quotes. Now the development of the story. First of all, there is an introduction of Mrs. Anne Pearson and Mrs. Fitzgerald. Mrs. Fitzgerald outlines the plan to reform Mrs. Pearson's family. Doris gets a shock. Cyril also gets a shock. The argument between Doris and Mrs. Pearson. Then discussion starts between Doris and Cyril. Then Mrs. Pearson's remark about her family. Mr. George Pearson is shocked at his wife's behavior. The real Mrs. Pearson returns. Mrs. Pearson and Mrs. Fitzgerald go back to their original personalities. So this is the development of the story, and if you will stick to this development of the story, you will easily understand the story. So this is how we will have to deal this lesson. I am once again just recapitulating the thing. First of all, we will have to find out that what is the theme. Then we will have to find out the setting of the play. Then we will have to attack on the vocabulary. Then the characters in the play and their traits. Then what is the style? Here it is magic realism and comical satire. Then we will just find out that what is the overview, and finally some quotable quotes and major plots and events in the story. So thank you for watching my video. Please share, like and subscribe. Thank you, my dear friends. Keep watching for more videos.